All right, joining me now is Walker Mehl covering Charlotte for Locked On Hornets, as well as WFNZ. He is a Charlotte local radio host. Walker, thank you so much for hopping on, man. Really excited to get your Charlotte Hornets coverage for this season.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you having me. It'll be fun to check in, and we'll see what the Hornets do. It's hard to figure out, as a lot of these Eastern Conference teams are, but man, it should be fun along the way.
As many of these teams go, this is just another team that I look at the rotation and the roster and think, man, there's a lot of rotation players here. There's a lot of talents here. There's a lot of guys that last year Charlotte goes 27 and 55, and there's reasons to believe that they will be better. Most notably, I think Miles Bridges and the reintegration of him. Is that the most interesting thing with the team right now? How do you think things are going?
Yeah, I think that's certainly fair to say. If you were to look at the top three storylines, if you were to try to dwindle this down and break up, okay, these are the top three interesting things. One is LaMelo, who, despite having a second overall pick, despite having Miles Bridges come back into the fold, they invested $200 million in LaMelo this offseason. No brainer. As soon as he was eligible for that rookie max extension, he got it. So LaMelo, coming off of all those ankle injuries, he was in and out of the lineup before the last one finally did him in. He played 36 games. That was it. Can LaMelo stay healthy enough to continue to be that guy and maybe even take a step up back into being an all-star like he was 2 years ago? LaMelo Ball taking that step and ascending, continuing to ascend. Hopefully that happens for the Charlotte Hornets. I think that's the number one thing everybody's paying attention to, in particularly like pick and roll game, defensively. That's what I would look at. The second one I would say is the second overall pick. Brandon Miller comes in as a guy where it's a different situation than Scoot Henderson in Portland. They trade Damian Lillard. It's pretty obvious they want him to be the guy. He gets the keys. You're going to get a lot of volume from Scoot. You're going to get a lot of volume from Wemby, as, you know, I guess depending on the minutes restriction they have, it's clearly his team. It's not necessarily the case here with Brandon Miller. It's different compared to the other two of the three overall picks. So now with Brandon coming in, you have LaMelo, it's his team. Miles Bridges coming in as a fringe all-star 2 years ago. You also have Terry Rozier and Gordon Hayward, who are at least veterans on this squad. They're good for 15 points per game. Brandon does not have a ton of responsibility, but even Steve Clifford has been adamant, whether it's been Hornets Media Day, whether he's hopping on Sirius XM radio, it doesn't matter. He's telling you that Brandon Miller is going to have a significant role. And this is coming from a guy that has a reputation that actually doesn't play rookies a lot.
Right.
Whether it's fair or unfair, Steve is very aware of that reputation. And he's telling you right now, Brandon Miller is going to have a significant impact as soon as we start playing basketball October 25th. So I'd say LaMelo, Brandon, and then I'd go with Miles. He's suspended the first 10 games of the regular season. He's not allowed to play in the preseason. They have their first game October 10th, tonight, against the Miami Heat. So how do you integrate him back into the system, right? This is the first time he's played under Steve Clifford. Last time he played with the Hornets, it was all under James Borrego. So there are things to learn. Plus, the guy hadn't played basketball in over a year. So how much is he going to have to knock off that rust defensively, offensively, all-encompassing as soon as he comes back onto this team? So, yeah, I think those would be the three most interesting storylines.
There's a lot of elements here. There's a lot of elements for a team that had been in kind of the fringes of the playoff picture for a little bit, but has gone backwards this last year, certainly, and looked almost unserious at times, the way that either things were approaching and the way that the Miles Bridges situation panned out and kind of just the way that they played. And I think a lot of that is going to come back down to LaMelo, and a lot of that's going to come back down to Steve Clifford making sure that everybody's going on the same direction. So I'm curious what kind of team this group wants to be, and whether LaMelo is the guy that you pay $200 million for. Is he the guy that you're going to want leading that charge? I think there's a lot of questions about that nationally, at least.
Yeah, they want him to be the guy. And I think over this past offseason, I feel like nationally, people forgot how good LaMelo is with a full bill of health. Because if you go back to his rookie season, all the big-time national NBA pundits made it a point to say that LaMelo was affecting winning, which is really hard for a rookie to come in and do. That was the narrative. Now it's the complete opposite. Now
Yeah.
you view what he did in those last 36 games where he was the only guy. Gordon Hayward's hurt. Miles Bridges isn't on the team anymore. You got guys in and out of the lineup. He's having to take over, and he gets a little too shot happy. Like, I get it. There was this level of ball hoggy type to his game. Like, I understand that. You also want him shooting a lot. If he's the best three-point shooter you have, especially with a down year coming from Terry Rozier, you don't have Miles Bridges. PJ got a little too much volume last season that it better suits him to be a role player 3-and-D without having as much usage. But they needed to go that route because at times he was the only healthy starter that you had on this squad. So with LaMelo coming back into the fold, hopefully healthy, he's wearing ankle braces this season, Ryan. Like, hopefully he's able to play as much as possible. I hope he gets back to that all-star billing that he had 2 years ago. He doesn't even have to take as much responsibility. Better players are going to make the product look better, period. So Terry Rozier, Gordon Hayward, PJ, another year of Mark Williams, who looks very good coming into his second season. I think all of that's going to help. And so, yeah, LaMelo offensively, Steve Clifford is letting him run the show. There was a little bit of worry about Steve Clifford running an NBA offense that is high-paced. Fast-paced. Well, when LaMelo was in the lineup, they were top 10 in pace. And there were legitimate questions about it with Clifford at the helm, but I think he answered that. He let LaMelo run things when he was there. He wasn't holding him back. Defensively, even after the All-Star break, they started to play a lot better defensively. One of the better defensive-rated teams in all of the NBA, which is shocking because the Hornets notoriously play awful defense, especially under Borrego. So, yeah, there are some reasons to be optimistic about this squad.
I look at the rotation and I see 8 guys I think that have a significant chance of starting. I see LaMelo, Terry Rozier, Gordon Hayward, Miles Bridges, Mark Williams. That's who I have penciled in as the group right now. But PJ Washington started and then I think has a claim to it after the contract that he signed this last offseason. Brandon Miller, the number 2 overall pick, and then Nick Richards is the other guy, is maybe the other center that maybe they decide to go with over Mark Williams. But it sounds like maybe it's Mark Williams's role at this stage.
Yep. So you're right about these guys getting rotation minutes. Nick Richards will be the backup center. Mark Williams got that job, really started to be a part of the rotation after Christmas last year. So people were a little, they were wondering why Mark Williams, it took him so long to see the floor, especially when you didn't have that deep of a center position. But man, once Mark hit the floor, defensively altered a lot of shots. Really smart basketball player. Offensively, even has a little touch. And he's got a lot more confidence. You can see it, put on the muscle watch season. Mark Williams being certainly a product of that. He's going to start at center. Nick Richards is going to back him up. The real question is, okay, when we get to the front court, are you going to roll with Gordon Hayward and Miles Bridges as the 3-4 combo once Miles comes back? But PJ is going to start at the beginning of the season. So once we hit that 11th game, are you letting Miles Bridges buy a little time before you throw him into the fire? And if the Hornets start like 6-4, if they actually have an above 500 or right at 500 record, then do you not want to mess with that chemistry, especially with Clifford allowing his rotation to develop chemistry? Like he'll stick with a group for quite a while. Then are you just going to, ease Miles Bridges in up until like December because of all the basketball that he's missed? What kind of chemistry he's building with? The Gordon Hayward, PJ Washington, Miles Bridges, 2 starting spots combo. That's what I'm really interested in. Brandon Miller will come off the bench, in my opinion. He'll have a significant role. I don't think he'll start. But it's Gordon, PJ, and Miles as like Gordon probably starting at 3, Miles and PJ at 4. That's going to be fascinating to see what they do.
Is there a possibility that maybe they even start Brandon Miller at the 2 eventually and try to go with a supersized group?
Terry being a veteran on this squad is probably always going to start at 2. At least that's how I would see it. Steve Clifford also praised his veterans, praised the hell out of Terry Rozier and Gordon Hayward. Terry spends his off seasons in Miami. He came back a month earlier, and he told everybody this offseason it's the most excited he's ever been to put on a Hornets uniform.
Wow.
Maybe I'm naive. That's fine. Maybe I'm buying into the rumors that typically come about this offseason. I believe it, though. And I think I believe it because if you go back to last offseason, the vibes, they were so dark. They were not good. You're talking about Miles having been arrested for felony domestic violence. You're talking about LaMelo, remember, even injuring himself in the preseason before you start to go into the regular season. They were not good. And now you have Miles back. Depending on how you feel about it, the team, they feel good about it. They really like Miles as a teammate. So they feel good about it. Mark Williams looks like the real deal as a starting center, in my opinion. They feel really good about this squad. So if Terry Rozier comes in as the vet, I do think that he'll start as long as he's healthy. I think he'll start alongside LaMelo, with Brandon possibly playing some supersized backcourt, but I think it'll be off the bench. Maybe you experiment with some closing lineups, but I think they're always going to want to roll with Terry for the most part.
All right, so last year I mentioned they won 27 games. This year I had it slated that they'd win 29, which feels low based off of what they've added to this group, what like the amount of talent that they're getting back with a Miles Bridges, with a Brandon Miller as a second overall pick coming in, hopefully a healthier LaMelo Ball. It's just really difficult with this Eastern Conference, especially kind of that 8 to 13 range where you just don't know who's gonna drop out, and maybe it is the Hornets that rises up to the top of that group, and I look stupid when I say 29 wins. But where do you think your win total would stand at this point?
Well, no, I think nationally that's probably a pretty good guess, or at least compared to anybody else judging this team. I just think that this team suffered so many injuries last year. LaMelo only playing 36. We've referenced that quite a bit. But here are the guys that played the most amount of games for the team last season. So it's PJ, who played 73. Could have played more, but It was at the end. I think he was suffering some kind of injury, and they didn't rush to bring him back. JT Thor played the second most amount of games. Nick Richards played the third most amount of games. Then it's Terry Rozier, but then it's Mason Plumlee, Jalen McDaniels, Dennis Smith Jr., all in the top 7. 3 of those guys, or 2 of them in Mason and Jalen, and then Dennis Smith Jr., I should say 3, they're not even on the team. But you had to rely on them so much because LaMelo gets hurt. Terry Rozier missed some time. He had 63 games under his belt and still appeared in the 4th most amount of games last season. I just think because of the health, because they do add Brandon Miller as a second overall pick, I'm buying a ton of stock in Mark Williams. I just think he's going to be a big-time factor with this team, especially defensively. And then you have to factor in 2 Miles Bridges coming back. 27 they were able to get without those guys. 29 does seem low to me. I think you're probably, if I were to set the over-under, if I was in charge of all the lines, maybe 35 is probably what I'd roll with, something like that. And the goal for the Hornets should be to get in the play-in, not get blown out like they did 2 straight times when they got to the play-in, and find a way to get a top 6 spot. Like, get some legitimate playoff experience. Even if you get boat raced, 4-0 sweep by the number 1 seed just because you got the number 8 seed, that's fine. You have to get to the playoffs somehow. Don't get blown out in the play-in tournament. That should be the goal. And so I think with the guys they have coming back, with some of the talent that is, kind of a pseudo addition in the Miles Bridges situation with LaMelo being hurt so much, I think that 35 is probably what I would set the over-under at.
So you would call a successful season at this point, just based off of where they were, kind of the progression that they're going through. A successful year would be to crack that top 10 at least, and then win in the play-in tournament.
Oh yeah, I think. Look, top 6 outright, skipping the play-in tournament altogether. That's going to be out of the cards. I think the most optimistic of fans would say even that's still a little too rich. I would say that the goal should be the most optimistic of realistic scenarios. Host a play-in tournament if everybody's clicking. Host a play-in tournament game, and then win that game, and then get to the playoffs. Find a way to break into one of those spots after you find a way to get there through the play-in tournament. I think that should be the goal, because this is a team, what was it, 3 years ago now, the Hornets get blown out by Indiana by like 30 points.
Right.
They print the box score as a reminder how badly that hurt, and then they get beat by a worse margin the next year by the Atlanta Hawks. It was a disaster. Yeah. And so now that's what led to Borrego's firing. A lot of people questioned it. I get it. but they got destroyed in 2 play-in tournament games, and that was it for Borrego. So can they do that now? Steve Clifford almost gets a pass for what happened last year because they suffered as many injuries, I would imagine, as any NBA team. So this year, if everybody's healthy, what can Steve Clifford do with this squad? And if you can get into playoffs via the play-in tournament, I think that's the goal that I and a lot of Hornets fans have in mind.
Well, Walker, we will see what happens. He is Walker Mehl covering Charlotte for Locked On Hornets. Make sure to check out his afternoon show, WFNZ, on Charlotte Local Radio. Walker, thank you so much for tuning in for this episode, and I'm excited to hear about your Charlotte Hornets coverage this season.
Yeah, man, we'll see how it goes. I appreciate you having me on. This was a lot of fun.